if the job of the president was merely to avoid catastrophe, congratulations. But I don't think that's what the only job of the president in attempting to steward an economic recovery is. And so whether you judge it a failure or success, or whether you judge some of the predictions by Republicans to be a failure or success, is something that historians can look at. But what we know is what has hit us today, which is that a large number of our citizens in my state and across the country are unimpressed with this recovery and the effect it's had on their lives.
While we in America hear words such as economic recovery bandied about daily without so much meat behind it, talk of dollars also begs our turn to the east and what, if any, good economic sanctions against Russia will do in the wake of Malaysia Flight 17. Let's welcome to MidPoint the editor of Power Trend Profits, Forbes contributor and noted economist Chris Versace joins us today. Chris, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, so happy to be here, Ed. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Chris, we're going to start out overseas first of all because as always happens, something catches my eye immediately when I'm looking at different stories. This one immediately caught my attention. Russia's billionaire businessmen are horrified at the prospect of crippling economic sanctions in response to Moscow's involvement in Ukraine, but are too terrified of President Vladimir Putin to say so openly. You agree with that?
Well, it's really interesting, Ed. When you look at the Russian economy and where these guys are making their money, oil, gas, over into Europe, big dollars are at stake, and I think they're very much afraid of losing that economic incentive that makes them, of course, millionaires and billionaires. But at the same time, Putin is showing that he is ruling with an iron fist, and I think that yes, they are very hesitant. But I do think that profits and prosperity will rule out on this, Ed, and that as we're starting to see things are starting to come together, and I wouldn't be surprised if we might have some sanctions, but we're not going to go to phase 3. We're starting to see the investigation open up a little bit when it comes to the Malaysian aircraft that was shot down. And I think before too long, the stock market and everything else will begin to look past this and see this as a one-time event.
Well, is it not fair to say, though, that these people certainly can be upset? Because here's one, OAO Novatech. It's a gas producer partly owned by one of Putin's allies. Their market value was cut by almost $3 billion after they were barred from using U.S. debt markets for new financing with maturities longer than 90 days. Okay, take the economics out of this for a sec. $3 billion, they're hit. But is it not fair to say that Vladimir Putin, he also gains an awful lot here? He's also involved in this. It is going to hit his pocket one way or another, because it's not as if these owners of the gas companies, Gazprom, Novatech, are the only ones making money, correct?
No, that's absolutely true, Ed. It's kind of the old boy network over in Russia, if you want to think of it that way. Who knows who is on whose board, who's being compensated by who. So yes, if part of Putin's allies and friends and business partners are feeling the heat, you can rest assured that he is too. So there is some, you may not want to talk economics like you and I think about it in terms of global economies, but in terms of the personal pocketbook, he's being hit.
So let's look at what the EU is going to do here, because I've always said that they have to be involved as much as anybody else. We need help from them, certainly on the economic side of things, that they're planning to expand their list of Russian officials and businessmen and entities under asset freezes and travel bans. Chris, honestly, boil this down for us here. Is any of this, where we're at right now, what we know these sanctions could be, going to make any difference to push the Russians, or do we still have to go further?
Well, it's a very tricky line, Ed, and I say that because we know right now during the summer, oil, gas demands by the European Union are not as robust as they will be several months from now. And where do they get the vast majority of their oil and gas? From Russia. So it's kind of poking the bear, no pun intended, of saying, watch out, you be careful, full well knowing that in several months' time, they will need Russia as a source of energy. So I think it's a very tricky line, and it's one that's going to have to find some balance.
Do you think, though, that the Germans, the French especially, and the others who are on the other ends of pipelines and economic deals are as mortified as Americans are by seeing bodies piling up in a field in the Ukraine, that they are willing basically to say, all right, look, we need to chuck our fuel prices here for a while. We need to basically fend for ourselves, and we've got to say something to the Russians. I got to tell you, Chris, honestly, there's a lot of people around the world who don't see that happening.
Well, I think anytime you see bodies piling up, I think it paints a pretty morbid picture. And I think people start to wonder what could or could not happen. But at the end of the day, I do think that, dollars, not the U.S. dollar, but dollars and profits are going to rule. And I think we're going to see that continue.
So you do think that the Europeans will get involved or will get on board somewhere here in some sort of sanctions? I mean, meaningful sanctions.
Yes, I would be surprised if they don't. The real question, Ed, is do we go to phase 3 sanctions or not? That's the big differentiator. I do see us ratcheting up sanctions, but again, going to phase 3 could have some repercussions later in the year.
All right, now phase 3, that basically is entire economic sectors, defense, energy, that could damage the Russian economy. Is that something that if America pulls the trigger on those level 3s, with or without Europe, that it could put the Russian economy straight into a recession?
Well, it'll certainly, challenge the Russian economy. When you look at us as a trading partner, we're not one of the biggest ones for Russia by far. China, Western Europe, Canada, Mexico are far bigger partners for ourselves. I do think for that to significantly happen, we would need to see the EU get on board for that. But let's be honest here. If we continue to restrict or even amp up the restriction on Russia to the credit markets, the global stock markets, and the like, yes, we will put a serious hurting on their economy.
Germany is the one right here that comes to mind right away, the biggest economy in Europe right now. Angela Merkel has been talking to Putin as well. And on the other side, you have China, who is also looking to potentially do some deals with the Russians as well. They're involved. They're in bed together. Do you think we're getting to a place where the Chinese may even want to say, this is getting a little dicey here. We may even want to back out because it doesn't make us look good, or do the Chinese simply not care?
The Chinese are a tough one to kind of figure out sometimes, and I think this falls into that camp. I think that as they become more of a world power, I think it behooves them to sit back and say, what's the proper thing to do here? But that doesn't mean that they're going to.
All right, I want to go ahead and spin to disposable income here, which is fascinating here. There's so many numbers out here from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. There's so many different graphs that are out here right now. We could spend a week and a half here looking at graphs, but I think let's go ahead and talk about it. There's a discussion factor here that said disposable income simply is not what it used to be, and Americans need to understand that. And I'm even looking at an article right here that says it is called the rot, R-O-T, the rot of the U.S. economy. Give us a little bit of a background here.
Well, Ed, when I look at, the various sectors to invest in, whether it's in the thematic growth portfolio that I run or in my investment newsletter, Powertrain Profits, the consumer is a key driver of what's going on. And you have to understand how a consumer is able to spend. You get your paycheck, you pay your taxes, hopefully, and you have certain fixed costs that you take out, your mortgage, your car payment, your utility bills. And what's left over, Ed, is what really is the economic engine. That is the disposable income. Money you can spend on clothes, go out to eat, that sort of thing, go to the movies, buy presents, buy books, that whole kit and caboodle. So for me, it's a very, very important economic indicator. And I have to be honest with you, Ed, over the last several months, as we've seen food prices climb, the entire protein complex is just ratcheted up. We take a look at gas prices. Those have, climbed as well. Now we're seeing a number of different companies pass through price increases. Everybody from McDonald's, Sonic, Chipotle, Starbucks, and just last week, the Hershey Company put through an 8% across-the-board price hike. So when we put all this together and we look at the state of the jobs being created, more part-time, more skewed towards lower wages, it's a little concerning for me about the consumer in the back half of the year with the all-important back-to-school spending season and, of course, the holiday shopping season.
About a minute or so left, and I wanted to get right to that statement here, and I wanted to get your opinion on this as well. I want to finish the one I started. It says, no matter how hard they try, Americans, the American government will realize that no amount of money printing can cleanse the rot of the U.S. economy. Would you agree with that and the thinking behind that?
I absolutely agree with that. What are we doing? We're keeping interest rates artificially low. At some point, and I think this is the big risk, Ed, in the back half of the year, that we've kept rates so low, and the expectation is they will remain so low that we could get blindsided by a real push in inflation. That's my biggest concern, because then all of a sudden the Fed might have to catch up and tighten faster than expected. Right now, the first hike for interest rates is expected sometime in the first half of 2015. Could it come higher? It could, and I think that could really, really have a ripple effect that hurts us. What will it do to housing, a rate hike? Probably hurt it.
About 15 seconds. Is there anything the government can do at this point other than printing money in order to try and stave this off?
Well, I think they should, do what they were founded to do, which is, minimal government and get out of the way.
Minimal government, get out of the way. Wait a minute, hold it. I don't see that anywhere in any of the plans for anybody in Washington right now, Chris. Really?
That's right.
What's wrong with you, Chris? It's not sitting there anywhere. You have to be a little bit more realistic, man. Get with the way the government works.
You asked what they should do. I'm telling you.
I'm with you all the way. I just wish somebody else would be hearing it. Somebody inside the Beltway would be nice as well. Chris Versace, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much. We'll do it again.
Thanks, Ed.
All right, there's your economic reality for the day, if you will. Later in the hour, how much real danger are Americans being placed in by their own government, specifically the Center for Disease Control? Weren't these the guys that were supposed to take care of us and also make sure that we never got sick? There's a real problem here brewing. We'll talk about it when MidPoint continues on the Newsmax TV network.